In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to set up some simple checkboxes that allow us on and off yes or no options for respondents to select when they're working with our interactive PDF form. To show you how that works, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in closer to what we're working with right down here. Let me move this up just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my selection tool and I'm going to select this little square that we set in the print form for someone to check on or off. And in this case, we're going to set up the way that you can do that digitally. So I'm going to click on that. And when I do, it gives me the ability to set the type of forms that I want to work with, just like we had before. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, turn this into a checkbox. It'll maintain all of the attributes that we had listed before for this button. The green rectangle, the size of it, and the empty fill. And it's going to turn this same graphic element into an interactive form. Now we have all the capabilities that were available before. I can set an event for what happens when I do specific things. I have some different options for what will happen as I'm working with it. And I also have a default value that's set up for this. In this case, the default value would be yes if that button is selected. Now, we're going to apply some effects to this. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to move it over just a touch so I can see that just like so with the checkbox. And beneath here where it says appearance, you'll notice that we have a number of options available for what it looks like. So in this case, normal, if that's checked and it's on, will show a check mark, just like we see right here. Normal, if it's off, will not show a checkbox. It'll simply be blank. If I go to the rollover that's on, or the rollovers that's off, it'll show what happens when I roll my cursor over that area, whether I have it selected or not. And I also have the ability to set up what will happen with fields if I click on or click off from that field. So all of these options are available for me to select. These two are loaded in by default. I'm going to turn on and off what happens here for the click on and click off. I know what that result's going to be. I don't need to change it. But what I would like to do is I'd kind of like to stylize this a little bit more if I get into a rollover situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the appearance for my rollover on state. Then I'm going to go to the Object pull-down menu, and I'm going to go down to Effects, and I'm going to select the Outer Glow effect. Let me move this over so we can clearly see what happens as I'm working with the Effects dialog box. Now, by default, it shows a blending mode and opacity. The blending mode is set for screen, and the opacity is set for 75%. If you work with Adobe Photoshop, or you've worked previously with Adobe Illustrator, you'll recognize these blending modes. We'll leave the screen option as it's shown right here available. But what we're going to do is we're going to change this color from paper or white, which doesn't show up very strong on a paper or white background. We're going to give it another color. And the color I'm going to pick is this red here that corresponds to the R in RGB and all the swatches that we have available. Now I could also choose colors from other areas if I wanted for RGB, CMYK, or what's known as lab color. But we're just going to leave it and take it off the swatches, and then we'll apply some stylistic effects. I'm going to select that color and I'm going to say OK. And then you'll see it kind of picks up a faint rosy glow as I'm looking at that. I'm going to change that screen opacity from 75% to 100% to make that a little bit richer. Now, I've got options for what technique I use to apply that. It could be softer or it could be precise. I'm going to select precise because what that'll do is that'll give me a larger border area to work with outside of it. Although it looks a little clunky on this screen, it'll be a better effect when you get to the PDF. And I'm going to change the size of it down to 0.0625 or a 1/16 of an inch. Now, I can set an additional spread that actually makes that richer. So in this case, it shows as bright red along the edges of my box and my check mark. Or I can soften that up a little bit. And I'm going to pick a number. We're going to say 25%. If you don't like working with this slider, you can always highlight the number and change it to whatever value you want it to be. Hit the Tab key, and it will do that as well. So I can see with the preview, what's going to happen is if I roll my cursor over that, and it's selected as on, it's going to show this rosy glow. I'm going to say OK. And as I do that, now I go to roll over off, I'll have to match that same effect. So with the rollover off, that's not selected, I want it to do the same thing. I want it to light up when I'm working with it. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Object, Effects, Outer Glow, and I'm going to do the same things I had before. I'm going to change the color here to that brick red. I'm going to change the opacity to 100%. I'm going to use the technique not softer, but precise, and bring that down to a 1/16 of an inch. No noise, no spread. And what's going to happen now is if I roll my cursor in or out of there, it'll show that little glow that we're talking about. I'm going to say OK here. And when I do, it's going to show that's the effect that it's going to look like with the rollover off. It'll look like this with the rollover on. Now, it won't have that effect if we're just talking about normally selected on or off. And we're not going to check options for what it's going to do if you click on or click off. Now, if I choose, I can set this up to be required. In this case, once again, they can't complete the form and submit it unless this required form is filled out. And one thing I'd like to do, just to encourage folks to get all those Total Training latest course offerings, is I can say that that's going to be selected by default. So while it shows as a checkbox, and that'll be in there on the form, they'll actually have to click it off to not have that option selected. Think of this as opt out as opposed to opt in as we're working with the information from this checkbox. Now, I'm going to do the same thing as far as the formatting of data working with email here. I'm going to take this and I'm going to make it a checkbox. And in this case, I won't apply those effects. I want to give the value not yes, I want it to be email. I'm going to click here. Again, I want to make that a checkbox. Make sure that as I've got this in here, we'll just make it mail. And then over here, we're going to click on this one. Again, make it a checkbox and set the value for phone. In each of these cases, we've got the appearance states that have already been set, as well as the information that we have that allows us to build in what we're working for, to get the data in that we want and to get the information out that we can use. In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to work with a variation of the check boxes that we practiced with in the last unit that are known as radio buttons. Unlike check boxes, which simply allow you on or off, yes or no, either or choices, radio buttons allow you to create and select from multiple choices that you get to specify the specific values for. Now, We can create a group of radio buttons from scratch, but we actually have a series of these that are actually pre-built that we can pull down, and I'll show you how those work in just a minute. Let me begin here by just zooming in on the first area where we're going to set those radio buttons. This spot that says Ship By, and we've got options for UPS, for United Parcel Service, the U.S. Postal Service, and for FedEx. We're going to create a set of radio buttons that will allow us to build on these choices. I'm going to get my selection tool, and I'm going to click on this Sample Buttons and Forms panel that I've got loaded in with my interactive for PDF workspace. And as I do that, it shows actually a series of options that we've got. And I'm going to choose these right here, the ones that say 016, and I'm going to drag them over on the page. We're actually going to replace these check boxes we've got right here with these radio buttons that are actually pre-built when you're working with InDesign CS6. Let me get this panel out of the way. I'm going to move this over just a little bit further, and I'm going to set these to the side just like so. Now I have 3 of these radio buttons, A, B, and C, and that just happens to correspond to what I'm working with. I could also create additional single buttons where I could make this 4 choices, 5 choices. If I wanted it to be only 2 choices, I could delete one of those and do that as well. But in this case, I'm going to take this radio button group and have all 3 of them selected, and I'm going to name it Ship By. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this down by starting the move and holding down the Control and Shift keys, since I'm working with a Windows PC for this chapter. If you're on a Mac, Command Shift will do the same thing, and this will basically allow me to scale these down proportionately so I can make them fit the size of these buttons. Now in this case they're still pretty large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again go to the corner here, in this case the lower right hand corner. I'm going to hold down the Command and Shift keys, and that's going to allow me to scale these to make these buttons roughly the same size of what we're working with for these checkboxes we previously created. Now, these were built for doing work with print. We don't really need these anymore. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to click on this first one here and then get my text tool. I'm going to highlight it just like so, and I'm going to replace that inline graphic that we created for the print version of this form with a fixed space. So I'm going to go to the Type pull-down menu. I'm going to go to Insert White Space, and I'm going to replace that with an N space. That's the same size as a lowercase n for whatever font attributes you've got. The keyboard shortcut for that for a Windows PC is Control-Shift-N. If you're working with a Mac, the keyboard shortcut would be Command-Shift-N. And as I do that, it's going to replace that space. Now I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to highlight the next one, and I'm going to go Control-Shift-N for my Windows PC, Command-Shift-N again if you're working with a Mac. I'm going to highlight this one. I'm going to go Control-Shift-N one more time, and I've replaced those inline graphics with those boxes. Now it's time for me to move these radio buttons where those used to be. So I'm going to click on the first one right here, and I'm going to move it over just like so, so I can actually place that first UPS button. I'm going to take the second button right here, and I'm going to move it just like so. And I'm going to take the third one, and I'm going to move it over as well. So it lines up evenly. The smart guides let me know where I'm at, and I'll use my own visual skills to make these move closer to line up to the edge of that type for UPS, USPS, and for FedEx. Now, these show different states, But when we create that interactive PDF form, none of them are going to be selected unless I choose this selected by default option. That's what I'm going to do for the first one, because we're going to say, for the sake of argument, shipping by UPS is the least expensive way to do that for us. I'm going to choose that by default, and I'm going to change the button value from choice to UPS. I'm going to click on the second one. Now, I don't want that selected by default, and I'm going to make that one Post Office, just to make it a little bit different than USPS. And then I'm going to click on the third button, and I'm going to give it a choice value of FedEx. When we take this form and we have our respondents fill it out, by default this one will be selected, but they can choose other options between these three if they'd prefer to get it from the post office or by Federal Express. So that's basically how we can use presets to create these buttons. Now, because I've done this once, I'm going to be lazy, hold down the Shift key, and grab all three of these. I'm going to go Control-C to copy, Command-C if you're on a Mac. Then I'm going to go Control-V to paste, and that's going to create a second set of radio buttons. Now I need to rename these, otherwise I'm going to have mirrored values. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them all, and I'm going to rename them Payment. And move these over, just like so. Now I've already sized these to fit roughly the way I'd like for the ship by options. So by check, money order, or credit card, I simply need to replace these with those end space placeholders. So I'm going to get my text tool. Going to highlight this first inline graphic and go Control-Shift-N. It would be Command-Shift-N if you're working on a Mac. I'm going to do that same keyboard shortcut replacement for the money order and for the credit card. Now I'm going to get my selection tool, and I'm going to click on this button, move it over like so, just kind of bump that up so it's roughly centered. And I'm going to change the value for this to check. Turn off that selected by default, because we're going to say, for the sake of argument, that we don't care which payment option they use as long as they pay us for what we do for the course. I'm going to take this second button and I'm going to line it up using the Smart Guides to line it up vertically, and then my own visual skills to make that match horizontally next to money order. And then finally, I'm going to scoot this over just a little bit more, click on this like so, and place the third one, change that value from FedEx to credit card, and I've got separate values for what happens here, here, and here. Each instance, although this one shows what the click-on state is, and this shows what the normal off state would be, doesn't really matter, because when we create the form, none of them are going to be selected by default. Now I may choose, in this case, for the payment group to say that it's required. So I'll go up here and select the group, and in this case, I'll say that those are required. They have to pick a choice there. I'm going to do the same thing down below for my ship by options. And say that this group is required to be filled out. Now that doesn't mean that they have to pick any choice in particular here. It just means they have to pick one away from the group to take that and make that work. In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to set up a couple of list boxes that will allow respondents to our interactive PDF form to choose options that they have for filling out data information. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. In this case, I'm going to bring that back down to that 150% that I was working with before. Let me move this over. And I'm going to replace that text box that I created right here for the expiration date with a standard list box that we have available that we're going to modify just a little bit from our sample buttons and forms library. What I'll find is that I have some specific options that I can use for certain types of forms. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag down the one that's known as number 025, set this off to the side, and what it does is it allows me to set option boxes for the day and for the month. Let me close this. We'll now delete this option that we've got right here for our text frame, or in this case what we had set up as a text field. And I'm going to modify this information right here that I've got so we can place this information for our combo boxes for the day and for the month. I'm going to begin by taking my text tool and I'm going to highlight from the expiration date over here all the way to the end, and I'm simply going to delete the end of that line. I'm now going to take my selection tool and I'm going to grab these elements right here and move the month information, we'll say just like so. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this day information, which we're actually going to modify to show the year, and I'm going to set it aside. We'll get back to that in just a second. Let's start right here and go to our Buttons and Forms dialog box. And what it does, it shows combo box. Okay, in this case it says CB2. If I click on this one, it shows CB1. So I'm just going to change the value here for this one to the name is month expires. And I'm going to look at the options that I have available here. And what it does, it shows 01 through 12 for January, February, March, and so on through December of the year. Now, I can make that printable, of course. I can have it required, which I want it to do if I'm going to do the credit card. But again, I have other options. Folks may choose to do by money order, or they may choose to simply pay me by a check. So making that happen this way is probably not the best way for me to do it. I'm just going to leave the printable option here. The sort is already set the way I'd like it to be. And we've got an option for this, so what will happen is it shows this list box. If I click on it, it'll give me a drop-down choice for all of these, and I can pick whichever month that my credit card expires, if that's what I'm working with. So I'm pretty much set here. I do need to do some formatting for the type, though, because if I click right over here, I'll see I'm using that Minion Pro Regular, 14 points, in this case on a 30-point line. But leading's not going to be that important with a separate text field. If I click over here, inside this field, I'll see that that's set for 12 points over 14.4. It's also set to be black. So I'm going to go Control A to highlight it all. If you're on a Mac, Command A will do that. And I'm going to change the size to 14 points on 14-point leading. Now I can't see that right now because there's more text information there than there is for the size of the text box. I can adjust that just by getting my selection tool dragging that down, dragging that across, and moving just like so. Now, just like I could format this type, which, by the way, I need to make that blue, so I'm going to change that color for the type from black to my Pantone 288C blue. I can click on this option box, and I can change the fill here from 10% black to 10% Pantone 288 blue. So that'll fill in and correspond to what we've got loaded in for this field and this field right here. So that's the first one that we want to do. We're going to change this one. So I'm going to hold the Shift key down, and I'm going to move it over so the center of it lines up just like we've got. Now I know I've got to make that type bigger, so I'm going to open it up like this. I'm going to bring it up like this, and I'm going to now take that and line it up. To match up with my type, just like so. We're going to change the term day to year. Make it 14 points over 14 leading. And again, take it and change it from black to that Pantone 288C. Let's format this second list box that we've got and give it a fill of 288C and keep the 10% tint that's loaded into it. So this now looks just like what we have right over here. If I want to make it a little bit bigger, I could do that, but we're not going to bother in this case. We're just going to fill it in as we've got it. Now, I'm going to go back to my combo box. That's what this is right here. This is just dummy text that sits next to it. And I'm going to change this to year expires. And I'm going to go to the top of this. It lists every day from 1 to 31. And I'm going to delete every single one of these. I'm just going to hit the minus key. Or I could actually go down to the bottom and kill these one by one until there's nothing in there. We're going to put brand new options in here. So I'm going to start with the list item here, and I'm going to click inside of this, and I'm going to put 2012. That's the year that InDesign CS6 was first introduced. I'm going to add that option right here. Now I'm going to add 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018 for when the credit card that someone would be using to order either a subscription or a DVD course from Total Training, when that credit card they used to pay for that will expire. So I can use that raw model that we had for loading down a couple of these list boxes, and I can actually fill that in for what we've got for the options that I want to allow my respondents to offer. Let's go to the top here where our credit card information is. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a brand new list box from scratch. So I'm going to get my rectangle tool, and I'm going to make it just as big as this field we've got right over here. I'm going to move it over so it lines up with the bottom of the text. And I'm going to drag this out to, say, about right here. Now I've got a plain old rectangle here. There's no format for what form field it's going to be. I'm going to change that to a list box. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this list box 1 and I'm going to name it card type, because that's what I want folks to have the options to load in. So for my list items right here, I'm going to list MasterCard. Visa, American Express, and Discover. Now, I've called this a list box. That's different than a combo box in that this doesn't allow respondents to add their own options. If somebody, for example, had a card with an expiration date of 2019, even though that option was available, they could type that into this combo box that we created. Over here, with the list box, they can only choose between the 4 options that we've offered them. Now, I could allow multiple selections. I'm not going to. In that case, they could just hold down their Control key on a Windows PC or Command key, and they could select more than one option. I could also sort these by alphabetical order, but we're going to say for the sake of argument that we're going to use the most popular options for charge cards: MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Discover in these order. And as we do this, those are the options that we're going to allow respondents to our interactive PDF form to make. So we've got the data loaded in. We only need to do one more thing, and that is actually format this data field. I'm going to get my arrow tool, and I'm going to get rid of the stroke, give it a stroke of none. I'm going to give it a fill of Pantone 288 blue and a 10% shade. So now it corresponds to what we've got elsewhere on the page. I'm going to zoom out now by going Control 0. If you're on a Mac, go Command 0. And what I can see is that my form is taking digital form. So I've got my fields loaded in here for my text fields. I've got, of course, my radio buttons here. And this list box, I'm going to move it over to the right just a little bit as I'm looking at that view. And all the other information that I've basically got set up, ready to go to fill out with these fields. In the next unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to apply a couple of custom buttons that can be used to exercise certain functions for our interactive PDF form. In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to place a couple of custom buttons on the bottom of this screen right here. One that will allow us to print this form after it's been filled out, and then another one that will actually allow us to submit the form and place our order to Total Training for either online subscriptions or packaged DVD courses. To make that easy on ourselves, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to my buttons library, and I'm just going to select this one right here. So I'm going to hold the mouse button down, and I'm going to drag it down and place a button just like this on the screen. Let me zoom in closer and close the library for a bit. And I'm going to get my selection tool and drag it over just like so. And maybe make this button wider so it matches up with the right side margin. Now, as I go to my Buttons and Forms panel, what I'll see is that I've got options that are selected here for what this is called. And this one's going to be my print form button. So instead of calling it button 2, I'm going to name it print form. Now I've got a number of options that are available here. In this case, what it's going to do is it's set up to go to URL. I don't want that option. I'm going to delete the selected action, and I'm going to create a brand new button. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it print that form. Now this shows what it'll look like in the normal state, just as it exists right now. It shows the rollover state. So if I take my cursor and roll over, it'll look a little bit different. It'll look a little bit darker. And then finally, it'll show another option for what happens if I click it. I don't really much care about that in this case, but all those button options are available. The description that I want to place on this button is going to be here, and what I'm going to say is print this order. And I'm going to make that printable. Now, if I was using Adobe Acrobat Professional or Adobe Lifecycle, I could add a label on that button, but this is just my description. I'll add a label in just a bit. If I want to see a quick preview of what this button is going to look like when I roll over it, what I can do is click on this Preview Spread button down here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I don't have the ability to add the label as I would in, say, Acrobat Pro, so I'm going to put a manual label over the top here. I just want to make the function happen directly in InDesign. So if I wanted to do that, what I'd do is I'd simply get my type tool and create a brand new field. And I'll say print this form. Now I'm going to make this big and bold for my button. So I'm going to change the style that I've got here from Minion Pro. And I'm going to make that Arial bold 14 points on 14-point leading. I'm going to move that over this button, just like so. So it's centered in this highlighted area. And that'll place the text print this form over the top of that button. I'm going to select both of these items. Actually, let me change that from form to order. There we go. That looks pretty good. And move it just a hair over to be centered. Let me highlight both of these items, and I'm going to go Control C to copy, Control V to paste. If you're working with a Mac, the keyboard shortcut, of course, would be Command C and Command V to copy and paste. And I'm going to select this button right here, go back to my Buttons and Forms, and in this case, I'm going to name this not Print Form 2, I'm going to name it Submit Form. And for the description, I'm going to take that and I'm going to make this Submit Order. Finally, I'm going to do exactly the same thing over here with this text. Let me just double click in there to place my cursor. And I'm going to type Submit Order. And adjust the scaling slightly so I can effectively center this. and I have my second button built just like my first one. The only task that remains is that we need to assign an action to the Submit button. I'll let you do this on your own. Just follow the same steps you did when you added the Print Form action and choose Submit Form from the drop-down menu. In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a signature field on our interactive PDF form, as well as give it a couple of options for doing quick proofs that we're working with to find out what this is going to look like to our respondents to our student order form, as well as fine-tune any mistakes that we might have dialed into the process. Let me begin by going Control-0 to get in the Fit in Window view. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to create a brand new signature field right here. I'm going to get my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle just like so. Adjust it a little bit so it's centered. And now I'm going to go to my Buttons and Forms panel and change this rectangle into a signature field. Now, I've got some options here that I'm not going to use. I could make this signature read only. The only problem with that is if I chose that option, I wouldn't be able to digitally sign it later. And I could make it required, which I may want to do for internal purposes, for forms routing. But for something I'm going to ship out to the general public, folks may not be able to actually digitally sign this form, so I'm not going to choose that option. We're only going to leave the printable option here, so people could see if they actually printed this finished form, they could see their digital signature, if they have one created, right inside this frame. Now I want to do one more thing here, and I want to format this space before I place my digital signature. So I'm going to take the stroke around here, and I'm going to make that 0 points. That's going to give it a stroke of none. And I'm going to take the fill for that, and I'm going to change that from none to Pantone 288. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to give it a screen of 10%, just like I would have had if I was working with this before. So now this corresponds to the layout we have for all of the rest of the fill-in fields that we've built into our Total Training student order form. I'm going to save this work. So I'm going to go File, Save, and now I'm going to go through a couple of options that we have for seeing how this is going to work. The first option for a preview is actually listed right down here at the bottom of the Buttons and Forms panel, the Preview Spread button. If I click on that, what it'll do is it'll create a artificial SWF flash file where I can see an approximation of what this form is going to look like. Now, as I look at it here, I can see a couple of options. For example, I wanted to create a default setting to where this box is checked. It doesn't look like it's there like that right now when we're working with this SWF preview of the form. And also, I don't want to check any of these options. I want them to be able to choose any or all of these, or if they prefer, none of these options when they fill out this form. So I can get a proof, and this gives me a rough idea of what I've done to design my student order form, but it doesn't necessarily give me true proof of the pudding. For me to be able to do that, let me scale this down very quickly. What I want to do is I'm actually going to create a proof version of my interactive PDF form. So I'm going to go File, Export. The keyboard shortcut for that is Control-E if you're working on a Windows PC, Command-E if you're working on a Mac. And this will open up the Export dialog box. Now in this case, I'm going to create one that's called Randy9 Proof.pdf. And I'm going to save that type. Now I've got a number of options to do that, but in this case I'm going to save it as an interactive Adobe PDF. Now I already have a proof file here in my Chapter 9 Project Files folder. I'm going to replace it. You just click Save. Doing that gives me the option to save all the pages in my InDesign document, or a range of them. We only have a one-page document, so it really doesn't matter which one of these I pick. I can save pages or spreads. Again, it doesn't matter because I have a single-page document. I could choose to view it after exporting. I'm not going to select that. We know we're placing our proof in the Chapter 9 folder. I'm just showing you the export options right now. I can embed page thumbnails, which will give me a little synopsis view in Adobe Acrobat, or create layers. I have a number of options for the view that people will see when they first open up my interactive PDF form. I can make it anything from actual size to whatever default is set in the program, to 100% or smaller zoom sizes, to fit width, which I've set later for an option. I'm just going to take fit page for my option. And I have multiple options for how I'd lay that out, but again, I have a single page document, so it really doesn't matter. I could add a series of really spiffy page transitions if I had a multi-page PDF. So it could, for example, dissolve from one to the next if I wanted to go from page 1 to page 2, but since I don't have a page 2, that really doesn't matter. And I have options for resampling pixel-based images that are loaded inside my InDesign document when I export that interactive PDF form. Since both the Total Training Online and Total Training Graphics are encapsulated PostScript vector-based files, this really doesn't come into play. I'm just going to say OK, and what it's going to do is it's going to fire up a little warning. Because we set this up for conventional printing with spot colors and CMYK blends, it's going to let me know that the colors are going to be automatically converted to RGB for interactive PDF files. If I want to avoid any color shifts, I could click Cancel and choose Document RGB from the Edit Transparency Blend Space menu. We're just creating a proof, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to click OK to continue and let InDesign make that color transition automatically. We're just about finished with this form. In this, the last unit of Chapter 9 of our InDesign CS6 course, what we're going to do is we're actually going to set the tab order so it follows in a logical pattern from left to right, top to bottom, as we're working with this form. We're going to do that by basically going to the Object, Interactive, Set Tab Order menu command. When I do that, this basically shows the sequencing for all of the tabbing that we've got. So in this case, I've got the top set pretty smoothly. The name, address, city, state, zip code, phone number, email. And beneath that, I've got my credit card number, security code, those check boxes that we set that we haven't named, the ship by information, the payment information, and then the card type. So as I'm looking at this, I've got a couple of these that I didn't really name the way I'd like them to be. I'm going to go back and rename these fields, going back to buttons and forms and setting those options. I see I've got problems with the check boxes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to rename those. And I also see, as I'm looking at this, that I have the CB1, which is actually my years expires, that I've got to rename. So I'm going to cancel this out. I'm going to go back to buttons and forms, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the problematic areas. By clicking on the selection tool and going here, I'm going to change this one from CB1 to year expires. And then I'm going to change this checkbox right here to KMI for keep me informed. I'm going to click on this checkbox and I'm going to change it to by email. By mail. And then finally, by phone. So now I've got these labels set. I fixed the little mistakes that I found in the process. I'm going to go back one more time to Object, Interactive, and set tab order. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to set that sequence I'm looking for. Across, top to bottom. Now as I look at the start of this, name, address, city, state, all that information we had before is set really the way I'd like it. But I want to take my payment options and stack those up before the credit card number. Move this up just a little bit more. And by the same token, I want to take my option box for card type and I want to place that above my credit card number. As I've got that set, it sets this information. I've got the credit card and the security code, but I don't have the expiration months or years. I want to take these two and move them up in the order as well. So in this case, put them just before security code. I want to take my ship by options, place them above keep me informed. So I've got that now by email, by mail, by phone. I want to take my signature field and put that immediately above the option to print form and submit form. And as I've done this, I've basically adjusted that to the tab order that I would like it to be. With the tab order set correctly, I'm going to say OK, and when I do that, I'm going to save my file one last time, and we've just finished this chapter of our InDesign CS6 course.